Hello.
So I think I forwarded Taylor's email to you guys to try to figure out how to avoid the feedback that we're getting. I think she suggested a way if you can mute your mics when you're not talking, which I see that you guys have done because I can see that little signal here. So thank you. I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes to see if Taylor or I think Jermaine will be with us. He should be. He's back from North Carolina, thank God. So do any of you have any questions about the assignments, the previous assignments?
I do.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if we covered it already, but on the prop plot, where it says page number, should we just do time, a timestamp?
Anytime it says page, just use time signature.
Okay, and then on the costume plot, are we doing shoes and tights and earrings along with?
Yeah, it's nice to know, but you don't have to give that much detail.
Okay.
So just say shoes and earrings as opposed to what kind of shoes and what kind of earrings.
Okay.
Because we're basically doing this for the stage manager. So an ASM may want to be sure that somebody's completely in costume, but they wouldn't need to know what color the shoes are. They can just look at the person and see that they're fully dressed. The costume designer can then use it later on to put in a lot of detail.
So is that if shoes are being used as a prop, meaning they're not entering or exiting the stage with them already on?
Yeah, it's always an area, a gray area when it comes to costume props. If somebody carrying on shoes?
Well,
we don't. I don't.
Tosses them off stage at one point.
And like the scarf, he tosses off stage. So,
but he came on as a costume, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would call that a costume.
Mm-hmm.
I generally consider a costume a prop when somebody needs to bring on an article of clothing, not wearing it, but carrying on an article of clothing. Therefore, it would have had to be preset somewhere backstage so the person wouldn't forget. Because it's not generally good to preset that kind of stuff in the dressing room, or it could be easily forgotten. So,
but the shoes that they're wearing, that's interesting for dancers to theater, because most of the time we carry our own shoes with us, so we wouldn't go get them out of the costume.
But are you carrying the shoes on stage? Or
well, that's what I'm saying. In my scene so far, I don't have shoes that are used as a prop.
Right.
When I'm listing all of the costumes of the men and women, I haven't been including what shoes they're wearing as part of the costume.
You should.
Okay.
I haven't either. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But you just put shoes for right now.
Okay.
Okay. So anybody else have questions? I'm just going to close the door. So just a reminder that, first of all, I'm going to be in my office tomorrow for 3 hours from like 12:45 to 3:45 if anybody wants to talk about the assignments in any more detail, either by email or phone or in person. And also a reminder that we're talking about these assignments and it's good to keep up on them, but the assignment that you have been doing is the biggest assignment of the semester. And what we're about to start talking about today is the second biggest assignment. And then they're going to drop off to some actually pretty mundane things like filling out a health form. And it's pretty basic. But both the plot lists and the schedules are the most complicated. So I just want to go over the assignment. So starting today, you're going to be creating the following schedules and calendars, which aren't, as I say, not due till the end of the semester. The master calendar, which I'm going to start calling a block calendar because I think it's a more common usage. And when we get into that, I'll show you why. And then also, I had asked you originally not to do the tech dress and performance schedule until later, but we're also going to talk about that today, which you have to do. And then you have to do a daily schedule. And then I'm going to ask you to do a touring schedule. Samples of all of those things, plus a lot of other schedules that you don't have to do, have been posted to Moodle. I'm going to go over them in detail today. So if you have any question about, am I supposed to do this schedule, just let me know, because we're going to go like through 12 schedules. You only have to do 4 of them.
And that's the block calendar, the daily schedule, the touring schedule, and which?
The tech dress performance schedule, which
Got it.
I'm wondering in some other universe if there's terminology, a more graceful way of describing that particular document. We kind of use, I think, the tech perf schedule here, but I imagine in some companies there may be some more professional way of describing it. This is an accurate way of describing it, but it's somewhat cumbersome. And then on Wednesday, we will talk about things that you read about today, company rules, putting together a stage manager's kit. And then we're going to talk about the glossary, which I gave you at the beginning of the semester, and we're going to walk around the theater and the booth, and you can ask any questions. I know, Felicia and John, it's going to be very difficult when we get to that. My trying to show you, John, you can probably sign off. You do. I know you know all those elements of the theater, so you probably don't need to know. Felicia, I'm going to try to move my laptop around and shine it on the item that we're talking about.
Is it from 12 to 1:30 that whole time?
We'll be in class in this room from 12 to 12:45, and then we're going to go on stage.
Okay, I was just wondering because if it was at the beginning, I was going to see time-wise if I can make it back in time for work, but I don't think that'll work out. So I'll have to do it from here.
Okay. Hi, Jermaine.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I was just asking if anybody had any questions regarding the assignments on the plots and lists. I think you said you were going to, at some point, send some to me that you want me to look over. Is that correct?
I actually asked for clarification. So okay. As it's related to how you want them broken down, like one of my questions for the Matthew Bourne Swan Lake, as we are basically breaking it down and doing the entry and exits of different characters for the scene development, do you want it like a list, or do you want it like the character and then entry time, exit time?
So down the left-hand side, you have the time signatures.
Okay, yes. And
so anytime a character enters, that essentially becomes a new scene.
Okay.
The one thing that's different is in terms of the ensemble, once they come on stage in a particular costume,
okay,
you do not need to mention their entrances or exits again.
Oh, perfect. Oh, see, that's
if
right.
they come back again in the same scene in a different costume, which I don't know if they do, they may in some of these scenes, then I do want to know that.
Okay.
But I do want to track the entrances and exits of the 5 main characters.
Okay.
I mean, if somebody is dancing on stage and they go off stage for 15 seconds and then come back, that's not a new scene.
Okay.
The reason we're breaking it up this way is so when we're doing rehearsal schedules, we can list exactly who's needed for a call and keep other people from having to hang around when they're not needed.
Perfect.
As well, it's also used for costumes and quick changes as well.
Okay.
So
Um,
just
Thank you for that, Matthew. I appreciate that.
Sure. And I will be in my office from 12:45 to 3:45 tomorrow if you have more questions.
Thank you.
so if someone exits but comes back on within the same scene, you don't need to list their entrance and exit again?
I kind of want to know for the leading characters.
Okay.
Like, say, the queen comes on in a scene at 1 minute 30 seconds and she's there till 3 minutes, and then she leaves but doesn't come back until 6 minutes. I do want to know that.
Okay,
It's when they pop on and off that I don't care.
great.
Like, because I think they do that in some scenes where
Oh,
they
okay,
go
a million
they go
times.
on and yeah. It's
Well,
based
and definitely in the entrance of the ballet, like there's a lot going on when he wakes up and then he's changing clothes and then that whole section. It's a lot of staging ins and outs that are happening during that time.
So if you can think of it more from a standpoint of costume changes and how would the ballet master or whoever's scheduling the rehearsal would break up a rehearsal schedule, if that helps in terms of whether it should be considered a new scene or not.
Okay, thank you again, Matthew.
Sure, sure.
Are we doing are we doing our weekly schedule?
Yes, that's what we're going over today.
Oh, okay, so that's not one of the ones listed in the 4.
You're using, these are all, so tech dress performance schedule and daily schedule are types of rehearsal schedules.
Got it. They all fall under that umbrella.
Yeah, master calendar or block calendar is not a rehearsal schedule. Neither is a touring schedule, but
Okay.
the touring schedule and the block calendar affect everybody involved with the production. The tech and performance schedule involves some of the people. It involves the lighting designer, but it doesn't necessarily involve the tech director. So that's that. And the daily schedule probably only involves the dancers and the choreographer and an accompanist. So there are different constituents for each one of the calendars, which I'll try to go over today.
Do you think it would be possible to get a list of all of the documents that we're accruing? I tried to make a list off of the syllabus and off of what we've talked about in the emails. But I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything, because sometimes where the names of the items are sometimes different here or there when we're talking about them or whatever. And I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
So these are the list of items that I'm requesting you to include in your final project. Is that right? Okay. So I will update the deliverables sheet, and that will have the accurate names, because there are a lot more documents on Moodle that I'm requiring. That we're studying, that I'm not asking you to do.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I know with Swan Lake, we've focused on a kind of production that some of you may never be involved in your lives, and others of you will eventually be involved with maybe companies that do story ballets or ballets, longer length ballets that involve scenery and those sort of things. But today I think we're going to focus more on the kind of dance company and scheduling for that kind of dance company that you are actually involved with right now and probably will be involved with for quite some time. So there are some things I wanted to go over that are not in the book, and then there are some things that are in the chapter that I want to go over. So first, I want to go over in this discussion of schedules is why are schedules important? What should be included in them? Who should be recipients of particular schedules? And what to consider when creating schedules, when they should be sent and where they should be posted. And I am going to post today's lecture notes to Moodle for you guys. I just realized that it may help you. It's, you know, it's just a list. It's not the full discussion. They're They're prompts for me, so don't consider it the be all and end all. And some of this, obviously, you're going to find is very obvious, but I'm going to talk about them anyway. So, schedules are important for the following reasons. They have the clarity of calls when people are called. It includes all the deadlines. It also ensures that no two groups of people are using one space at the same time, or for that matter, using the same resource at the same time. So schedules would help clarify that. If you do a careful schedule, you'll find out, oh, that's not going to work because these two groups of people can't be on stage at the same time. It will help you determine if you've scheduled enough hours or days for each activity. I think you'll find that choreographers and directors in their minds have a set amount of time that they think that they need to space a piece, to tech a piece, in the case of theater, to block a piece, which in theater goes in matters of weeks. In dance, we're talking a matter of hours, not weeks. They also, when you're in a professional situation, confirm that you are sticking to the union regulations. And they also serve as the guide to everybody involved in the production of a dance concert. So I think it can be helpful even if you're a dancer. Well, that's not a good example because if you are, say, the prop master, it's important to know, say, when the scenery is getting done. So on a master calendar, it's important that everybody on a team can see what everybody else is doing. It is also your most effective tool to communicate and document production information to a wide group of people. At the end of this, I'm going to ask if I've missed anything. So if you guys want to jot down things about what's important in the why, where, who, what of schedules, I'd be glad to hear them. So what should be in a schedule? Obviously, the date, the time, and the location needs to be included. Each particular schedule, and there are many types of schedules, should only include the required information. So to give you an example, a block calendar is something that's used by the entire creative team and the crew. It's not used by the dancers. So on that schedule, you wouldn't want to include a detailed saying you want your schedules to the recipients of that schedule. You also want to make your schedule as clear as possible. It's like emails going back over and over again to reviewing it to be sure that not only if the information is correct, but that is communicated in the clearest way possible. So that's the what. Okay, and who should receive particular schedules? As I just mentioned, the only recipients of individual schedules should be those people affected, which is the example I just gave. For instance, designers and crew do not need to know detailed breakdown of rehearsal schedule. That's what I just said. One thing that's helpful in terms of schedules is not only who should receive particular schedules, but how it's delivered to individual constituents. So we'll talk a little bit more about this on Wednesday, but you want to hand somebody a hard copy. You may want to post it on the call board. One thing we find particularly effective here at St. Mary's is to create team drives, one for the cast and one for the crew and designers, where those schedules are in a file. Get more and more complicated for certain organizations, like in opera, I may have mentioned this before, that often they will get their daily schedule the next day through some sort of email, not an email, but some sort of like Google program that's sent to them at midnight every night because they change that rapidly. So you just want to be sure that you're using the right tools to distribute your schedules. When should we receive schedules? Obviously, it needs to be in advance of the first date of the activity on that schedule. In something like a master calendar, which is often sent out months in advance. For instance, right now I am looking to hire a music director for a spring musical. So I've had to create a calendar for them to see if they can actually take the job. So that schedule is going out to them 5 or 6 months in advance. It's important that obviously that as those schedules are updated and changed, that they're then given to people. Again, I tend to err on distributing my schedules too often, so I've tried to pull back so people don't find it annoying. But you need to be, think about, okay, I sent out a master schedule 2 months ago, and we're going into production in 2 weeks. I should probably send out the schedule again. And most likely it's changed during that time. Another example is with production meetings. We established the weekly time for production meetings. Often they're established, like in a school, they're set up, we meet every week at this time, or we meet every 2 weeks at this time. But I also remind people 2 days in advance of that meeting, and it not only announces that meeting, but it also asks people if they want to include something in the agenda. So it serves two purposes. But once again, you're being sure that you're reminding people as needed for a particular event. Some of the rules of good scheduling, which were not discussed in this book. The book kind of just jumped right in on what the schedules are and not the reasons behind. So I'm trying to be sure we cover most of those. So here's some rules of good scheduling. For instance, on the block calendar, which is for the creative team and the crew, you want to be sure there's agreement on all parties that are included in the schedule. I, as production manager, don't create the schedule in a vacuum. I ask the TD for the information, costume designer, the wardrobe supervisor, everybody who's involved. I say, what do you want on the schedule? Or say, I need these dates to include on the schedule. Tell me what they are. And then possibly before I distribute the schedule, I would distribute it to these individual team members to be sure that I've included all the information that they wanted. You need to be sure that there are breaks and that there are meal breaks. And, you know, a lot of these things, when you're not in a professional situation, is going to tell you exactly when these breaks need to occur. That you as a choreographer are going to want to know when there are breaks, because you're looking out. You may be looking out more for the health and safety. Your stage manager is too, but you as a choreographer are going to have feelings about when people need to eat and when they should have breaks. So those things should all be included. And as much as possible, this is particularly true when you're creating tech and dress schedules, is that you include catch-up time, so that if something goes over its allotted time, you have time to catch up. Like with an audition schedule, stage managers often set it up so there's 5 10-minute sessions in each hour, And then there's 10 minutes at the end of the hour, which is not, is for catch up and for the director or choreographer to take a break. Those auditions are intense and they sometimes don't have time to write down or even kind of assimilate everything that's seen. So that's one place where, if possible, you want to have catch-up time. In tech rehearsals, obviously things happen in tech rehearsals, you all know that. If you can include catch-up time either at the end of a certain block of time or at the end of the day, it's very important to do that if at all possible. So this is something that I just took out of the chapter. So it says, please note, depending on the progress within a given call, management may adjust the work plan to best accommodate the needs of the production as they develop. Start, end, and break times will be honored, or they can be changed. So not last summer, but the summer before that, and it was the first time I was the production manager for the thesis concert. It was a complicated concert, and they scheduled to tech all 12 of the pieces in one day. It was something, they scheduled 1 hour to tech each half an hour piece, which is not a lot of time. And so we got to an incredibly complicated piece, and it was late in the schedule, and I just made a decision, and I told the stage manager, we have to keep going. It was a piece that involved makeup and all kinds of props, and to stop doing it, clear it, and then come back and set it up again would have just been a huge waste of time. So I said, okay, we need to run over the allotted time. The choreographer who came after was furious, but I just tried to explain as best as I could. The stage manager was in tears, unfortunately. The choreographer was not nice about it. I mean, everybody was under a lot of pressure, which you all know happens, but sometimes you have to do those things. When you're the stage managers, you have to think about those things. If I stop this here and we come back to it, am I going to end up just wasting more time? So I'm sure I could have been more politic about how I presented this to the choreographer. The choreographer who had just driven 12 hours from Texas and had just arrived in California and wanted to go to sleep. So there are complications, is all I'm saying, and you may have to make changes as we go along.
And I also feel that it's important to make the announcement ahead of time that while we're doing our best to stick to the schedule, be prepared and aware that changes might occur. Exactly.
So I think particularly in a tech performance, a tech dress schedule, it's really important to put that at the top of the page. When we get to talk about that, I'll see if it's actually listed on the top. It's not here. But yeah, that's a really good place to put it. And we're not really talking about orientation so much during this class, but that's one reason it's good to sit down with everybody before you start and tell them what's going to happen. We've just changed our rules in the theater program so that the crew has orientation now 4 days before tech rehearsals start, so they know what to expect and what changes can happen. So I wanted to ask you, do you guys have other things that are important to include when we're talking about scheduling in general? We're not talking about daily schedules or touring schedules, but other things that you really need to think about, because you all know a lot of things about from a choreographer and dance standpoint that I don't often think about. So.
Well, I guess one would be, and what I've had experience with is, it doesn't pertain to this so much, so I hesitate asking the question, but it's definitely been applicable in every single thing that I've done, which is determining a schedule based on the dancers, like what their availability is. And so when you're saying, for example, to get with the team leads of each of the creative things, is there like a protocol or is there?
Yeah, we'll talk about that more when we get to the tech dress schedule, but that's absolutely right. And just in case I forget to mention it, the way we do it here is the choreographers are responsible for their dancers and they're responsible for their schedules. So when the choreographers agreeing like, oh yes, I can come to a spacing rehearsal at such and such a time, they have confirmed all of that with all of their dancers before we gotten to that point. I'm sure at a more professional level that there's somebody who may, I'm not sure if there's somebody who's kind of the interface between a group of dancers and their choreographer, because a stage manager is generally dealing with an entire event and they may not have time to be the coordinator for each individual company, each individual piece, which may have different choreographers. So at this level anyway, because I don't know about other levels, it is the choreographer's responsibility. And you're absolutely right. There's absolutely no point in having a spacing rehearsal if the dancers can't be there. Right. The same thesis concert that I talked about that happened 18 months ago, we had huge problems. I was called in the last minute to call one of the shows, like 5 days before the show went on. And we kept having tech rehearsals with a dance that had like 14 people in it, and there were 3 people at the tech. And I never quite figured out when to call the light cues and actually ended up making mistakes during the performance. But yeah, it's really important that everybody's there for all reasons. Okay, so now I'm gonna move on to talking about specific kinds of schedules. So first, I'm gonna show you some examples, and these are all posted on Moodle. So those of you who are not in Moraga, I'm gonna try to show you the document and talk from behind it. So this is a term block calendar instead of master calendar. This is what goes to the creative team and the technical team. It is not something that goes to dancers, but essentially it goes to everybody else other than the dancers. So you will see on this list some of the things like when are the platforms being installed? When are the booms being hung? When are we focusing front of house? When are the production meetings? When are the photo calls? In the chapter that you've just read, there's a long list of items to be included, a lot of which have nothing to do with you, but it's, it never hurts to create a list and keep adding to it over the course of your stage management career, just to remind you, have I forgotten to include this? So that is what a block calendar is. This is, at this point, the block calendar that Relly has created for the St. Mary's Dance Company, which is the undergraduate here. Right now, so it starts with the beginning of the semester in August. Right now it includes auditions, but it also includes things that affect our dancers, that would affect the teachers. Like, and one thing that's a little different about this block calendar actually does go to the dancers. So it's a little bit different than the kind of block calendar that I just showed you that only goes to creative and technical people. So this actually includes things like add drop period, which affects who can be in a dance and who can't be in a dance. It's got showings.
Is that show like
who's in CUP and are on fire at any given time?
It does not have that level of detail yet because this calendar was made before that. It may show up later on. So they just finished picking their choreographers 5 days ago. And so I don't even know when, we know when half of them are rehearsing, but we don't know when the other half are rehearsing. They may show up on here and they may not.
So this is just, I'm just thinking.
One thing to note so you can notice the difference between a block calendar and a tech and performance schedule. So when we get to the point that the dance company is actually loading in and then starting spacing, on here it says spacing rehearsals starting on November 7th and running through November 9th. When you get to the tech performance schedule, it's going to have all of that detail, and that's why it's got its own schedule, but it also doesn't affect some people. Like, I like to go to spacing rehearsals as a lighting designer, but I'm not required to, so I don't really need, on this document, to know the detail. Beckett, as technical director, doesn't need to know when Bella's spacing her piece. So you want to be sure that the level of detail reflects the recipients of each schedule.
When you have, for example, Rowie puts no C, no M and U and H in her on November 12th, for example. I don't know what that means, but does she make a key for things like that?
She probably should have, but I don't know what that, I don't also, she does have a key for some of the things at the bottom.
Yeah, no, I noticed that.
But I honestly don't know. I don't honestly know what that means.
Okay. That's fine. It was just like on November 12th.
12th, and then on the 13th it says C, H, and M, U. I'm not sure what that means.
Costume, hair, and makeup.
Thank you.
Oh, so then
Thank you.
makeup and hair.
Makeup
so
and
they
hair.
don't do makeup and hair on the 12th. And
Thank
then
you.
costume, hair, and makeup. Yep. So there should be a key for that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I was like, who are these?
So this is another version of a block calendar. Here, I've also posted on Moodle a kind of master calendar that's in the form of a list, which these are for different productions done at St. Mary's. So the reason this was created is because the director of the piece find it easier to look at it in this format. It's also a master calendar. It includes the production meetings and all the tech dates and all that sort of things. And there's also, I also posted another one that has even more detail, which is the calendar, same as the master calendar or block calendar, that includes even more detail about, it includes all the marketing detail. So one thing we're not going over in this class is that the marketing department also creates their own schedule. A lot of times their deadlines are harder deadlines than anybody's. So this document happened to incorporate all of these things. Once again, it was so whoever received this, I wasn't the production manager at the time, so I don't know. Whoever wanted to look at it in this format.
So for example, the programs have arrived and the house manager is going to need to get that to the ushers. So they may be curious about that deadline. Would they then, would the stage manager tell them to go to the marketing team to receive that calendar? Or is that something that would affect more people, that they would just select that date that would affect more people to put on a master calendar?
Yeah, I don't think they would give any more detail than that because there's a large group of people using this calendar. So you don't want to go into depth in the same way that you don't want to go into depth. Beckett has his own schedule for when the scenery is being built. So each department's schedule you don't want on there because it would be so complicated that people would actually stop looking at it.
Right, but the directors of those departments would be privy to all of it. Because
Exactly.
say they want to rehearse this scene, but they see that it's not going to be completed until such and such date, so they can't start rehearsals till then. So
Yeah.
they wouldn't include any of that on their list to give their dancers, for example. They would
Right,
just
right.
list-
It just says rehearsal 6:30,
Yeah.
or whatever time. And there are certain people that want to know all of that detail that's on the block calendar. The producer and the director and choreographer sometimes wants to know all that. And a production manager wants to know that as well. The reason we're talking about this is because a lot of times the stage manager does all of this scheduling. Here at St. Mary's, Relly does the block calendar, and I do the block calendar for the theater program. But it is often the stage manager. So there are a lot of things in this book that are sometimes handled by production manager, some by stage manager, but I think it's really important that you learn particularly these things about scheduling.
What's that document called that you're holding?
This is just a production calendar. I guess you could call this.
There's
Oh,
two
you mean
of them.
specifically?
There's two of them, sample production calendar list, sample production calendar list, and I think one of them has a 1 up at the top, like in the parentheses.
Yeah,
One
it says
has a 3.
I think one of them's broken, one of the downloads, so.
Oh, okay. Well, you probably don't need to look at both of them. These are two different shows, but they have the same detail on them.
Got it.
I just
Yeah,
wanted you
saw
to see a list.
that one.
So- For example, right now, we're working on the play Three Sisters. I have not created the block calendar yet because we don't have a lot of the specific deadlines. So right now I just have a list of the important dates that the entire production crew needs to know. I'm about to do the block calendar now that these things have been decided, when the hang is going to be, when the focus. But I decided, if the costume designer looks at all this stuff, they're just going to glaze over. So I just wanted to put the important dates first, and then it will be turned into the block calendar. Okay. So before we talk about the assignment for this, just some other things that I took notes on. So as I said, either the production or the stage manager creates the block calendar. Relly does dance program. I do the theater program. And just FYI, there's also a calendar for the Lefevre space, a Gail Cal calendar called Lefevre Reservations. And all of the managers, Relly and myself, Beckett and Tara, we all go on that site and include anything that's taking place in the theater, because obviously that's where there can be a lot of overlap and conflict in schedules. But that's not specifically a block calendar, that's more of a facilities calendar, but I just wanted to let you know that that kind of calendar exists as well. In regards to that, it's important to know that sometimes multiple activities can take place in the same space at the same time. To give you an example, tomorrow we're having a prop meeting on stage, but the scenery crew is also going to be painting scenery in the wings. So we're sharing the space, but I got Beckett's approval so we can have that meeting. Often when we get close to Tech Week, I start programming the light board and looking at the light cues. I'm only sitting at the light board, and Beckett is usually on stage building scenery. They don't really affect each other. I say to Beckett, are you okay working under stage lights? Because they normally work under work lights. So I get his approval, and then we can put them on the same calendar. So that's just to let you know that it is possible to share the same location at the same time. I now want to read something from the book. So, Bella, do you want to read? It's on page 34. Yeah, why don't you just read these first two paragraphs before we start that long list?
The master calendar. Time, management of time, and the coordination of the cast, crew, and staff are important to every theater. In order to keep everyone on time and their efforts meshing smoothly, it is desirable to post a master calendar, and only one master calendar, at a convenient place to make it available to everyone on the staff. The master calendar can be your most effective tool for coordinating the staff. The master calendar should be large enough so that several lines can be written legibly in the space allotted for each day. It should, of course, be developed after consultation regarding the needs of the producer or management, the department heads in various phases of production, and above all, the director, with whom you work in a direct supporting role. The calendar should list many of the following kinds of events, but not necessarily all of them, and not necessarily in the following order.
Great, thank you. Could you also, who else has a book? Lisa, you have your book here? Can you read on page 35, starting at that first full paragraph on if you plan to have every aspect, and then read the example?
If you plan to have every aspect of the production in its final shape all at the same time, you are likely to have problems. By spacing deadlines for various aspects of the production.
Can you guys hear her? You can? Okay.
But by spacing deadlines for various aspects of the production, you may check on and overcome small crises rather than have to face and optimally surmount total panic. It's a little dramatic. Example, if you wait until the technical or tech rehearsal to check on the progress of your sound effects, you may find the tape not ready and the source CDs the sound technician expected to tape the last minute are missing. At the second tech, the sound technician finds that backstage speaker wires are missing and there is no spare wire in the theater. So you may get your sound effects working by dress rehearsal, if then.
So an example of how we deal with that in the theater program, and a lot of theaters have, first of all, what's called a paper tech. And we don't do this in the dance program here, but we do in the theater program. And that's where the designers meet with the choreographer or director and write the cues into the script. So it always involves the lighting and sound designer, and of course the stage manager. It's most important for the stage manager. But if there's complicated scenery, it involves shift crew heads, anybody. If the stage manager is having to call multiple cues in a particular department, that person needs to be at what's called a paper tech. Some theaters don't have it. I think it is worth its weight in gold to have the paper tech in terms of slowing yourself down. They also don't mention in this book something we do here, and that they actually do in most theaters, not speaking for Broadway now, the dry tech. So at our dry techs, the stage manager calls the cues, and the director or choreographer looks, as each cue is called, they listen to the sound cues and look at the light cues and make adjustments. So doing this without any performers. Sometimes if they're lucky, they can get somebody to, quote, walk the stage so that they can see what the lights look like on a particular person. So when we get to the first tech, the director or choreographer has actually seen all of this. So one of the things I try to do in the dance program, As a lighting designer, I like to come to as many spacing rehearsals as possible. I can't always be there, but I sometimes, or actually always, ask. I've already written my cues into the light board based on what I've seen in rehearsals and my discussion with the choreographer. At spacing rehearsals, I ask the choreographer, can I show you the cues? Generally, this is at the end of spacing, and they tend to run the piece at the end of spacing if there's time. And the choreographer will either say yes or no. But a lot of times here, the choreographer has time to look at those cues. So when we get to tech, they have that much more time to refine it. So if you can work those things into your schedule so you can buy yourself time later, they're always to an advantage.
So what's the difference between a paper tech and a dry tech?
Okay, so in a paper tech, I don't think this applies so much in dance, but in theater, you take your script and the stage manager writes the cues and the play. You would be able to take a lighting script, which is essentially a list of all the sound and light cues. You look at that, a dance script, and do the same thing. It's harder when there's not an entire dance company to look at lights, I think, than in the theater. But yeah, there's no reason why you can't do it. But paper tech is literally just on paper. It can be done in an office anywhere, not on stage. And the dry tech needs to be on stage.
Does that paper tech happen early on, like when they first get the script? Does that sometimes happen, or is that
so the show in the theater? The show has to be completely blocked.
Oh, okay.
So what has to be scheduled before a dry tech, either in theater or dance, is the show needs to be either completely choreographed or completely blocked, because the designers don't know where their cues are until they see the whole thing.
Sorry, I was referring to the paper tech. When would that?
So the paper tech needs to happen after some run through of the play.
Got it.
And traditionally in the theater, that's called a designer run. So for instance, with Three Sisters, at last week of the production meeting, we scheduled the designer run with enough time afterwards so we could then have a paper tech and then have a dry tech before the tech.
And
it's usually like the choreographer and director want it to be as late as possible, and the lighting designer always wants it to be as early as possible. And you're constantly saying, it doesn't need to be perfect, I just need to get the general idea of who's entering what and where, that kind of thing.
And say again, please, who is generally present at the paper tech?
At the paper tech would be any designer who has multiple cues. So almost always the sound and lighting designer. But if a show has a lot of scene shifts, then the crew chief would be there. Or I guess I've been to paper techs where the scenic designer has been there as well. And that can apply to projections, special effects. You know, if there's only one projection in an entire dance concert, I don't think that person needs to come to the paper tech. But when there get to be multiple cues, the stage manager needs to be prepared in advance of the tech to know when to call the cues.
So the order of things would be the designer run, paper tech, dry tech, spacing rehearsal.
No. Actually, yeah, well, it's a little different in the theater. So yes, it would be some sort of a run, but it's not generally a designer run, because when you're lighting a piece or working on some kind of production in dance, you usually go to the studio and see the piece completed. So that's essentially a designer run. That's when the choreographer says, I have enough of the piece together so you can come and look at it. That would be the equivalent of a dance. You know, if it's a evening length work and it's being done on stage, which is really unlikely in dance, it could be a designer run, but most of the time it's coming to see the work completely choreographed or completely blocked. So you would have that. Then if there was going to be a paper tech, well, actually the lighting designer would decide where they want the light cues. after they've seen the entire dance piece. They may or may not do that with the choreographer. Depends on how much conversation they've had up to that point. They may very well sit down in the room and say, I want to put cues here, here.
Mhm.
So that would be the equivalent of paper tech in dance. And then you would have spacing. Then you move into the theater, and then you have tech. So it's a little bit different in dance. And it's mainly different because dance companies don't get into their performing space until the last minute. Does that make sense? What I just said.
Yeah, I'm, just pulling from my own past experience, trying to sort out the different stages of what I did. And traditionally, I haven't needed a sound designer or a set or scene designer,
Mhm.
but I'll bring the lighting designer into the studio space and have them watch it all and then go through it again and be like, so these are the light cues here.
Yeah.
Once they have context of what's happening through the whole thing and who the characters
Right.
are.
Or the lighting designer would then go and write where they think of the cues and then come back and meet with the choreographer.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, no, I don't want a cue here, but I want a cue there.
So, but when the lighting designer has come to my space to choreograph, that would be considered a designer run.
Yes.
And then the lighting designer would get with any of the other people, like the sound technicians or the set people who are doing the projections, and that would be considered paper tech because they don't actually need to be on stage.
Yeah, I think if it's complicated enough, it would. I mean, a lot of times in small dance companies, that's kind of a moot point. You don't really need to have a paper tech with multiple designers if, say, the projection is running once and it's running behind an entire piece. You don't need to have the stage man, whoever's running the projection, that person doesn't necessarily need to be there. When it gets complicated, yes, they should be there.
Right. And then there would be a rehearsal on the theater to coordinate all of those with the different departments.
Right.
But
So
as far as what the dancers would be doing at that time, that would be like what I've always called that is a blocking rehearsal. Like I prepare my dancers, like don't wear dance clothes. You're just going to be standing around your bodies or what you're being used to like cue the lights and the sound together and make sure the designers are on board for what's happening.
So it's a little different, at least here. So you've done a designer run, or designers come to your studio to look at the piece. You've mutually agreed with the choreographer where the cues are going to be. The next thing that happens generally is if the lighting designer has time, and they can do this anywhere, and they can do this at home too on their computers. They usually pre-write the cues on the computer. Because the next thing that usually happens in dance is they come in and do spacing. And that spacing does not involve tech. It can, but it doesn't. What they're there for is the choreographer to space the dance. And so that's why I say sometimes as a lighting designer, I'd say, can I work my lights while you're spacing? And they say yes or no. But spacing is the important thing.
So the drag tech could be happening during the spacing rehearsal.
Yeah. Yeah, it could happen during the rehearsal.
Thanks.
So I'm just looking at my notes here. So as I mentioned, it's always good to pad your schedules a little bit, just in the same way when you're budgeting a show, you pad your budgets. I know the entire production budget, but I never tell the designers how much money they have. It's like this amount of money less 10%. And Beckett's the same way. It's like, here's what the scenery is going to cost, but it's less 10%. So there are these ways you can catch yourself and deal with crises as they come up. It's the same thing applies to time. Okay, so I want to read something else before. Then I'm actually going to talk about the assignment. I think it's easier to do this in order. So on page 37, you have your book, Haley?
Yeah.
You want to read starting at just the first full paragraphs, starting with some deadlines, some deadline dates.
Okay, and read the example.
No, you don't need to read.
Some deadline dates must naturally fall before others. Take-in day, for instance, must come before Focus Lights Day, since focusing of instruments is dependent on placement and shape of set pieces. Rehearsal props deadline should precede line memorization deadline so that actors can pick up their props or substitutes for them as they set down their scripts. If all staff members are required to post their requirements for use of stage and rehearsal space on the master conflicts.
No, that's kind of obvious, but a good thing to make note of. Okay, so now I want to go over to your assignment for the block calendar. So on Moodle, there's a list of everything. And you guys can get this stuff out of order. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I've tried to make this based on dance as much as possible. You have you're doing the entire month of May, just pick May arbitrarily, and I want you to include all of these things on the list. I probably don't need to go over them. It's like, I've asked you to put in production meetings, which need to happen weekly for an hour for the first 3 weeks. Costume fittings, you need to include 3 blocks of 2 hours each. Should I continue with this? So like with rehearsals, this is the block calendar. So you're not giving me detail of rehearsals, but you're saying rehearsals are 6:30 to 10. That's as much detail as we need. Deadline for comp ticket requests. Some of these I'm just asking, like, when do you think the box office needs to know comp ticket requests prior to opening? Warm-ups, I've already told you that the days for the light hang, the light focus, and laying the floor, which of course they don't have to, but laying the floor of course has to happen before spacing. And then it includes the other things that I want you to include on it. I want to include the sound cueing, when you're taking publicity photos, rehearsals. When you get to text, dress, and performance, you're just listing it in general. It's like tech, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's as much detail as it goes on a block calendar. So when you look at this list on Moodle, if you have questions, please ask me. As I say, I tried to build a dance company, and you're just using your own sense based on, I don't want somebody working for 12 hours. I need to be sure that there's a meal break here. You just need to have common sense. You probably don't want to work 7 days a week during the first 3 weeks of May because you're going to have to do that at the end of the month.
Matthew, just one question.
Yeah.
Would this be based on an optimal situation? Like if we're working with people we want to work with? Or is this based on we're being put in a situation where there's already staffing, there's already...
Well, I actually made a list of who the people are, but do it on optimal.
Okay.
You'll find when you go to this document called scheduling information, I have made up an entire company of 12 dancers, 3 choreographers, all the designers, which pieces they're choreographing. This is going to be easy when you do the block calendar, but it's going to be hard when you get to the tech because I've thrown in some few little things like one choreographer can't be there until 3 days into the tech rehearsals and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's the optimal situation, and you're just, you're adding these things to a block calendar. Pretty easy to incorporate all of these things. You just want to be sure they're not overlapping with each other if they take place in the same space. And I think you guys can think well enough to know that costume fittings don't need to happen on stage. They can happen somewhere else. Just use your common sense with that.
Are saying that Le Fever Theater is our
Yes.
home theater? Yes.
Yeah. Until we get to the touring schedule.
Yes.
Okay. So, as I say, if you try to look over this stuff, to at least the list of instructions maybe tonight, so that you can ask me tomorrow when I'm in my office. I mean, I'm going to be in my office all Friday afternoon too. So if you have questions about what to include, feel free to include more things that are on this list, but this is the minimum.
Friday from
2 to 5, I believe. But
and tomorrow.
Yeah. Tomorrow, 12:45 to 3:45. But I will, this isn't due till the end of the semester. It's just probably good for your assignments to think about what they are at the time that we're having the lecture. So it's not completely foreign to you when we come back to it. Okay. All right, let's move on to rehearsal schedules. So rehearsal schedules are created primarily for the performers. They're created by the choreographer and the stage manager together. They should never create them, and those two people need to be together to create them. Otherwise, you're just going to be going back and forth and back and forth. So I'm giving you an example of 3 different kinds of rehearsal schedules.
Really quickly.
Sorry?
I just said really quickly. I don't know, Jermaine, I don't know if you realized, but it's been off of mute and it keeps going back and forth, so it's hard to follow. Would you mind putting yours back on mute unless you're commenting?
Did you hear that, Jermaine? Is it possible? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, it kept going crazy.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of 3 different kinds of rehearsal schedules, and I'm asking you only to do one, a daily rehearsal schedule. It's very straightforward. So I've given you online, you'll find this whole document. This is an entire rehearsal schedule for the entire process from first rehearsal to closing night of a play. I think the original document is 17 pages long. So a lot of times a director or a choreographer would create this to be sure they have enough time to do what they want to do based on, I need 3 hours to choreograph 1 minute of choreography. People generally get in their heads how much time they need to do something. So that's the master rehearsal schedule. I've also put in 2 weekly rehearsal schedules. This one didn't print out completely, but they're kind of obvious. This one from New World Stages is a little more obvious, just for you to look at. So the reason you would have this is, once again, you're trying to let your performers know as far in advance as possible when they're going to be called. For instance, the show Three Sisters, they're doing schedules 2 weeks in advance, so the actors know when they have to be there. The third schedule I'm showing you is a daily schedule for production of Romeo and Juliet. It includes when, where, and who. That's who you need to include. So I'm asking you to do this for your assignment. So in your assignment, what I'm asking you to do, you have 6 pieces. There's some solos, some that have the whole company. You'll see on the list. I've asked you to include 4 hours for each of all 6 pieces. Production meeting with all staff, that's just one, and 1 company warm-up. This is 1 day. But you have 2 dance studios and you have a conference room. So you can actually fit all of these things.
What is the name of that document that you're holding?
This is called something scheduling information.
Page 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, scheduling information.
Where's the hypothetical conference room in this situation?
Yeah, you can say it's here.
Oh.
In the same location. One thing to note, and this will apply more when you go on tour, when you're trying to create your schedules and you're trying to put in breaks, but you realize you have to fudge, you can probably, as a choreographer, make an assumption that a solo rehearsal is going to need less spacing time than a half-hour full company piece. You may get into those situations. Once again, just use common sense. This is very simple. This is just dividing up who's who, except that there's one choreographer who's also a dancer. I've thrown that little thing in there as well.
Which is common, so that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so now we're moving on to the tech dress performance schedule. So this is a very complicated document that needs to be created. They all need to be created with care, but this needs to be created with great care, just as the way that a touring schedule does, because there's like limits. You can't be in the theater more than this time. A dancer can't dance longer than this time. So it can be very rigid, so you need to spend a lot of time setting it up. So the tech dress and performance schedule is created by a production manager or the stage manager, but it needs to have buy-in from the entire team. Most importantly, as we just talked about, the dancers who, through their choreographer, has told the stage manager when they are available for rehearsal. The tech director needs to be buy-in, and the lighting and sound designers also need to buy into the schedule too before it's published. So I think the easiest way to explain this is to show you the kind of tech dress performance schedule that we standardly use here at St. Mary's. And I think you've all seen it. Actually, some of you haven't. Jermaine and Bella and Felicia, you haven't had to use these yet, but starting next June. No, actually starting in January, you will. So basically it has all of the days that you're in the theater. In this case, April 29th through May 12th. It's 2 weeks that you're in the theater. For the tech performance rehearsal schedule that I'm asking you to do, I've already stated when the lights are hung and focused and when the floor is laid. So that's the first thing that happens here. So basically, yeah, the reason this is so complicated is you've been in a dance studio before and you move into a theater and you either don't have the theater available to you like at St. Mary's, or you're paying rent in all the theaters that you guys work. So you generally don't have a lot of money, and so it has to be done in the shortest amount of time. So when you look at this schedule, I'm just going to give you in these first 3 days. So the first 3 days were lighting, hang and focus, and laying the floor. That's all that happened. The next 3 days are spacing rehearsals. And so each in this case, each choreographer or choreographers has been given a certain amount of time for spacing. In this case, it's broken up into 2 spacing rehearsals. For instance, you'll see that Dana has spacing from 10:30 to 11:45 on Wednesday, May 2nd, but then she has 10:30 to 11:35 on Friday, May 4th. So some of them are broken up into 2 groups. For the sake of your project, I'm asking you guys to do 3 hours of spacing. You may have to break them up. So one thing that Relly's done that's just very clever is, so I've pre-programmed the board, but I haven't seen the light cues yet because we haven't been in the theater. The lights haven't been hung in focus, so there's no way I could have seen them. So she scheduled Dana's piece for spacing first. Then she found out she couldn't get another choreographer and their dancers to start spacing until 2:45. So she checked with me to see if I wanted to use the space to look at my light cues. And that's why it says cueing. And that's what happens over the course of those first 3 days in the theater. As I've mentioned before, just a side note, if I'm watching spacing rehearsals, I'll ask the choreographer if I can show them the lights too, if they have time to do that. So does everybody understand this? This is the point when the dancers are totally involved with making the schedule.
Matthew, I just have one question, and it's related directly to the 3-hour spacing rehearsal. Within the time of the spacing rehearsal, are we doing complete blocking with the stage being lit with house light, or is there any, okay.
You can assume it's lit with work lights and you're running sound off of a boombox or something.
Okay. Okay, and then the other thing is, will the floor be?
Yes.
Okay.
It will be installed, and hopefully wherever you work, you will never have to do these rehearsals before the floor is installed. Okay. So now you've got all the pieces spaced. They've either been done in 1 block of time or 2 blocks of time. And I've had time to look at all my pieces throughout the day. I was the only lighting designer. And then we came to the tech day. I think it's pretty obvious what's happening here. So just so you know, when this was created, these pieces are a maximum of 10 minutes long. And I'm asking you, most of your pieces are either 10 minutes long. There's one that I've said is 20 minutes long. But I'm still giving you 3 hours of spacing because I want to see you guys see if you can fit them in. So, okay, we've come to tech, and the very first thing is the crew shows up and they set up for the rehearsal. Once everything's ready, the dancers are called half an hour before they go on stage because they need to warm up in the studio. So you can assume, I've put this in your instructions, your scheduling instructions. For the first 3 weeks, you have the studios and the conference room available to you. Halfway through the 3rd week, the theater has become available to you, but not the stage. And I've said that basically that the booth has become available to you, and you can do blind cueing for lights and for sound. So that's why I put that there in advance. So on this schedule, you'll see there's only, it says cueing, spacing, running. The piece really should be spaced by this point. So that's only if there's time. Generally, the way it's done here for the tech rehearsal is they run the piece as best as they can, hopefully with as little stopping as possible, and the lighting designer puts, adds their cues, which have already been programmed. The choreographer's looking at these cues. Then the dancers have a little break, and the choreographer and the lighting designer make any adjustments to the lighting cues. And then they run it with the updated lighting cues. So that all happens within half an hour. So if you're using this as a guideline, this spacing, that's like wishful thinking. There's still spacing going on here. So this is, yeah, in a tech rehearsal, in a tech rehearsal, by the end of the day, the pieces need to be complete, except for costumes and makeup. The stage manager has to know how to call the show. So you're fine-tuning the calling, which is very complicated in dance, as you guys know, as choreographers. The lighting cues and the sound cues have been tweaked, so they're, you know, they can be tweaked again during a dress rehearsal, but you basically want them to be done. And you're doing this all over a one-day period on this schedule. On the schedule I've given you, you guys basically have 10 days to get this all done, the spacing, the tech, and the actual performances. So I know it sounds complicated, but I don't think you'll find it that complicated when you start. But please, if you find it overwhelming, please come and talk to me. So Bella, if you want to go over this in more detail, I will.
I just feel like I'm holding so many details of each of them all at the same time right now.
Okay.
That, like, I'm a hands-on kind of person, so once I get into it and I understand what's going on, it'll be less overwhelming. But I just
Okay. So let me ask you guys.
Seeing overwhelmed is because there's like so many details for each one of these.
Are you feeling the same way? Do you want me to stop? Because I'm happy to continue on Wednesday.
I don't have a preference for you to stop.
Are you guys all with me?
I'm with you.
I know you're with me, John.
I'm with you. I feel like I'll develop questions as I work on it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let me continue, and then maybe I will not start talking about the touring schedule until Wednesday. Whatever we don't do, we push to the next day. That's fine. So you've done this tech, and it's all happened in one day. It's not done in the order of the show. It's when the dancers and the choreographer are available. And this was actually Miracle of Miracles. Started at 9 and is over by 4:20, believe it or not. And that's, I don't know, how many? 8 to 10-minute pieces, or 10-minute pieces. And then for on this schedule, then the next day, this is one huge difference. This is based on a school. You guys are doing your schedules based on a dance company, not a school. So you guys know the limits of the dancers, but I've also told you, you can be in the stage for 8 hours a day. We can't call students during the day here because they're in classes, so you're not doing the same thing. So on Monday night, on Monday day, the lighting note's done. And then in the evening, you run the concert in order. And the concert really needs to be run in order before the dress rehearsal, because there's all of the things that the scenic crew has to do.
When does that happen, when it starts going in order?
Well, on the schedule in this theater, and this will be the same for this semester, it's on Monday night. It's not a dress, it's running the concert.
That's where it's a no makeup.
It's like a tech run, essentially. We do a tech dress in the theater program because we found that we needed an extra dress rehearsal. So if you did a show like Swan Lake, you'd have to have mega dress rehearsals because of the quick changes. So.
And you were saying for our assignment, we don't have to worry about people being in classes, but as graduate students who are also doing performances here, we do have to be concerned about that.
No, I'm asking you to do your assignments as a professional dance company. But there are limits when you can be in the theater, which you'll find in the instructions. I don't want you working more than 8 hours a day, and that's because dancers shouldn't work more than 8 hours a day. You know, if with really careful scheduling, you probably rehearse full 12 hours, the first 4 hours. The dancers are not called who are there at the last 4 hours, that kind of thing. So let me just finish this quickly, and I'll go over it again when we start on Wednesday. So Tuesday, once again, tweaking in the theater if possible. The dancers show up to warm up, and then they get into costume, or they get into partial costume and do their warm up, and do a full dress rehearsal. Wednesday is the exact same schedule. Thursday night, there is performance in the evening. Friday night, there's a performance in the evening. I think you'll find it very obvious when you actually look at the schedule. Saturday, there are 2 performances, and that's followed by the strike. And I think it will be very obvious when you look at this.
So there are 2 dress rehearsals?
In this case, there are 2 dress rehearsals.
Perfect.
Now, one thing when you start doing your schedule and when you're on tour, on a day that you only have 1 performance in the evening, there's going to be a dress rehearsal in the afternoon. And I think that's probably, is that what you did, John, when you were over at Dance Mission? Did you have dress rehearsals when you had performances in the evening?
I think so. Yeah.
Anyway, it's pretty common.
In Napa. I don't know what it's got it.
Okay. So now that I've totally overwhelmed you, we're going to stop, and I'm going to start again with this tech performance schedule again on Wednesday. It's complicated.
Can I ask one question about the master block calendar?
Yeah.
Is location included in that?
Yes.
That was not as clear to me.
Yeah, it's not as important because I haven't, you're just putting in rehearsal. I haven't asked you to put any more detail than that. I've said you have 2 dance studios to your, that you can use, but you're not putting that in the master block calendar. You're just saying rehearsals start at such and such a time.
Okay.
Like Bella said, and I think Felicia said the same thing, that when we get into it, it will start to work itself out.
Yeah.
Not unlike the Swan Lake,
Yeah.
like once you got in, right, then it starts to kind of, oh.
Yeah.
I just felt like with that one, I really understood exactly what we were doing. And of course, overshot it by a long shot because I was doing entrances and exits for every moment.
Yeah.
And like which side of the stage and all that. But this, I just feel overwhelmed because I can't synthesize the requirements to the examples yet. But when I start doing it, it'll
So
be
I'm happy to go over it with you anytime. We can either go over the examples or we can go over what I've asked you to do with the homework.
I think
which
I
may
just
be
need to
easier.
start on each of them, which you've written,
Yeah.
like start these. And as soon as I start on my questions.
But
will
this
come
this
here.
schedule, the tech performance schedule, is really complicated, just like the tour schedule. But the block calendar is not that complicated because I haven't asked you to put that many things in it. All right, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.